I don't know. How would you describe what you saw on my channel? If you were describing it to someone else, what would you say?
Very Jordan Peterson.
Yes, a lot of Jordan
Yes,
Peterson.
I would describe it as you are just your takes very much align with Jordan Peterson's from what I heard on most things.
Yeah, so I cite Jordan Peterson in a lot of my videos, but on a lot of important things, I disagree with him, or maybe I just don't accept. Whether that's the same as disagreeing. I just don't accept what he says about like religion and stuff, like God, Jesus literally rose from the dead, or that's too complicated to explain. So on some very fundamental issues, I disagree with him. Also, I think there might be, what would you say? He sucks on Twitter, and one of the best things that has ever happened is him getting off of Twitter. Better for everyone. Everyone who hates him, everyone who likes him. He's just awful at Twitter. So I don't blame anyone for. Plus, I don't blame anyone for not liking him. He's just kind of a grumpy. He's got like a grumpy disposition and whatnot. But I think like a lot of his psychological and philosophical, the way he's very good at explaining things. Like even like most of what he explains that I'm interested in is completely apolitical. It's just like, here's some facts about how the brain works. Here's some facts about how animals operate and all that stuff. So that's what's the most interesting to me. The political takes are boring, in my opinion, of his.
Oh yeah, I obviously don't like him because of the C16 thing.
Yes, well, maybe that's something we can talk about. I don't know. I know there's again, me not caring about his political stances as much as his like research and science and philosophical stances. I don't have as much background knowledge on C16 and all that as I should.
I could talk about that with you later.
Sure.
But we can go with like, what would you want to start out with? Because we can start wherever you would like. I could ask you a couple questions if you'd like to start out.
Yeah, well, I was curious. I mean, I'm interested in just kind of understanding your story. Because so like on trans issues in particular. I mean, obviously we can talk about that. I think the issues are very complicated, right? So it's there's a lot of desire to make things clean and simple. Well, there are these people, there are these people. There are true scum, there are too cute. There are, transsexuals or transgenders, and all like simple divides, because then it makes things easier for people to understand, and it's a very complicated issue. And the problem with that is obviously it's not as simple as that. So I guess, I have some very simplistic frameworks kind of like that, but before I even try to attempt to use it, I guess I would just kind of ask, what's your story? When did you transition? When did you know that you wanted to transition? I guess I just start with that. How old are you? You're 20.
I am 21.
21. Okay. And when did you start your transition? Out of curiosity.
I started my transition, and I started in 2017.
Okay, so 5 years ago.
Kind of.
Okay.
Yeah, I started HRT I started puberty blockers in 2016, and I started estrogen in 2017.
Got it. So how old would you have been when you were on puberty blockers?
16.
16. Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess how did you know, or at what point? I mean, at what point in your childhood do you remember like feeling the dysphoria, knowing that you wanted to be on puberty
knowing
blockers,
that,
something like
fully
that?
realizing that I wanted to be trans?
Yeah.
8 or 9-ish.
8 or 9.
When I got my first iPod right around my 9th birthday, I don't think I got exactly on my 9th birthday. I went really deep into YouTube. Really, really deep.
Sure.
And one of the things that I found was trans people existing. And that instantly clicked in my head. I went, I want to be a girl. And I instantly understood that upon seeing that you could do that.
Sure.
Because I guess I just had never realized that was even an option.
Right.
Like, if I didn't know it was an option, like I could never know. And then beyond that point, yeah. And I could look at parts before that and go, yeah, I definitely wanted to be. I just didn't have the words for it. But as soon as I got the words for it, then yeah.
Okay. So would you say, well, I guess, so what about the YouTube videos and stuff did you find? You said you didn't have the words for it.
You could have sex reassignment surgery. That was a thing.
Got it.
That you could transition, and there was transitional hormones. Just that concept. I just didn't have that concept when I was a kid. So I had no concept that like other trans people existed, for instance, like other people that were born in the wrong body, or and I didn't have the concept that like you could change your body.
Sure.
I didn't really get that.
Sure.
So I guess those two ideas, finding out about those, really pushed me. And then for the next like 6 to 7 years, I lived online exclusively as a woman. Almost, or I say exclusively, almost exclusively.
Sure.
I had some friends that knew, and they actively tried to ruin my reputation several times. So I had to bounce communities several times.
Oh, that's not good. What do you mean? I mean, without going into too much detail, what do you mean in terms of trying to ruin your reputation?
Try and say, oh, this is a guy. Don't.
Oh, I see. Sure,
I had friends that did that to me.
Interesting.
Isolate me so that they could have me to themselves.
Yeah,
I went not very good.
Not very good of friends if they were doing that.
Yeah, I would not call them good friends.
Sure.
But when they're all you have, and they make sure that they're all you have, it's kind of hard to.
Yes, that's fair. So would you say you felt? I'm just curious. I mean, so what's the earliest that you can remember feeling like feeling like you wanted to be a different gender without having the words for it? I mean, is that like
4, maybe
4?
I remember on my 4th birthday. This is a weird story, but sure. I'll take it back.
Yeah.
So on my 4th birthday, we got a cardboard house. For like it was really tiny, and I got one, right? And I remember I really
like a dollhouse or something, or like
yes, like a life size. Well, not for me, but like my height house. Like so, like I was like really tiny, so like this wasn't that big, but sure. It's like a little cardboard house, and I really liked like playing house in there, which to me was, and like I remember my brother saying like, "Oh, that's what girls do," and I really wanted to do it still, despite knowing that.
Sure.
And then my house broke, and I wanted to get another. So like, no, you don't need that.
Sure.
I was like, oh, and then yeah. So that was like the first moment where it felt like, again, like it's a dumb moment, but like I definitely could feel that there was something off there, but I didn't really get it. And then in my earlier years, I started developing like, now I understand it better of what gender dysphoria is. But like after understanding what trans issues were, I started developing anger management issues. I actually got medicated for them, and none of them worked because the issue was not that. It wasn't an issue of chemical imbalances necessarily. It was an issue of I was suffering from gender dysphoria, and I didn't know how to handle it.
So what? So like when you were going through the videos and stuff, like what, like on YouTube, like what? I mean, were there any particular people?
No, it was just the idea of sex reassignment being a thing.
So what? So I guess
I don't know how I got there. I'm gonna be honest.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know how I ended up there.
The infamous YouTube algorithm, pushing people towards something or whatnot or whatever.
Yeah. No, it pushed me. It did it. It succeeded.
Right. Well, I see a lot of Jordan Peterson videos, so it does push you to whatever you gravitate towards, whether you realize it or not. Okay, so I guess, and I'd be curious to hear more, just about your story anytime you want to bring it up. But, maybe. Well, I guess I don't know. Do you have any questions for me first, in terms of anything you want to talk about?
Well, I guess I'm just kind of curious, like what type of you've come to such like a fundamentally, I guess, different conclusion than me in a similar-ish ballpark. So I guess what I'm kind of curious about is like, what, like, not like, this is a weird question, but like, how did you grow up? Like, what was your childhood to teenage to like where you are now? How old?
Sure. I'm 25.
Okay. Like, how was like your early adulthood as well? Like,
sure.
I guess I'm just curious, like, did you get really into the gaming sphere, like that type of stuff?
Oh, sure. I would say I was not pretty. I was not pretty. I was pretty smart, and I was in like the gifted programs and stuff. And I think what happened in sort of early childhood is I think I felt like a sense of maybe superiority is kind of the word, or maybe it's something like, well, I'm smart, and so therefore I'm going to focus on like politics. I got really into like politics. I got into like, economics and stuff when I was, I don't know what, junior high, through high school. Because I was like, well, I wasn't very athletic. I wasn't very, social or anything. Well, I was social, but I wasn't like that, like popular. So I was like, okay, well, the way that I justify, me being me to myself is, well, all these people, they don't pay attention to like, George Bush versus, whoever, or they don't pay attention to Obama versus Mitt Romney or something. And those are the real important things, because politics has real implications for people's lives. And so therefore I'm better than people because of that. And that was a compensation thing. And so, I think, what would you say? I think for a big chunk of my life, and I would say up until even the last couple of years, because I started therapy during the pandemic maybe 2 years ago, and I started my channel in the middle of that because it was sort of like an outlet for me. But I was very much on the, I didn't know this. My therapist had to demonstrate this for me. There's a difference between a thought and a feeling. So if someone asked me, before therapy, up for 23 years of my life, something like, let's say a friend is being mean to me or an asshole or something, or for one reason or another, I don't know. And someone said, Paul, how do you feel about that? I would go, well, I think, this person's had a bad day and they're actually going through some tough times. So, that's why they're mean to me. It's like, no. That's a thought. That's me trying to figure out why they're doing it. Feeling is like, man, this sucks. Like my friend's being a fucking asshole to me. Like it sucks. And I never knew how to just put, words in terms of like feelings, right? It was all thought. So I always had to like construct reasons for, well, this is the way things appear to me. And I can't just accept it. I have to figure out and rationalize why or whatnot. And so I think, a lot like that kind of characterized how I grew up and kind of how I see the world. And then I say another important thing is, I came from I think this word gets thrown around too much, which ruins the definition, but I mean it. It's like I came from a privileged background, and never struggled, economically or anything. And, my parents cared for me. My parents didn't get along particularly well. So I, saw a lot of conflict in my home. And I think that's a big reason why I'm very sensitive to like polarization. Why, when I say I'm a radical centrist, kind of oxymoron type thing. It's like, well, I grew up being able to empathize with two completely different perspectives, both of whom I loved, individually. It was like my mom's perspective and my dad's perspective. And it's like they would fight, but, I was on both of their sides, so to speak. They both loved me, they both supported me and whatnot. So for me to pick a side, that idea was just kind of, I think I just learned how to see sort of the middle ground or at least the best I can see the middle ground that exists if there is middle ground. And so that's, I don't know, that's kind of I guess it's how I arrived here in a brief summary.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I would be curious after like that. You were discussing the idea of figuring out the difference between like a thought and a feeling, right? I'm almost curious. Would you say that your like political alignment shifted after discovering that at all, or did like your thoughts on any specific policy concept?
Yeah, my political alignment has definitely shifted a lot over the years. I used to be a libertarian, as cringy as that sounds. I have actually. I'll say this anyway. I have a picture. I've got pictures on my wall of people that are like intellectual heroes, and one of them is Jordan Peterson, one of them is Malcolm X, one of them is Milton Friedman, and the other is Jane Goodall. So it's a hodgepodge group of characters. But I used to be a big libertarian, because I was attracted to the intellectual, on paper, libertarianism can't be beat. It's just like in the real world is where it, is completely worthless. Not completely worthless, but sometimes very worthless. Shipping all of our jobs off because it's cheaper wasn't a good idea. But I would say, you asked, as a consequence of learning, thought versus feeling, did my political alignment change? Yes, because it's changed kind of how I've operated in general. But I have moved much more left on like economic issues, mainly because of COVID and just how things have played out. Like when Bernie Sanders would talk about, he wants to tax speculation, right? Like people, who do day trading and stuff, he wants to put tax on them. I kind of heard that and just went, well, this guy just hates capitalism, so anything he puts forward, I'm going to dismiss. But now I'm like, oh, like with the whole Robin Hood stuff and like, oh, the game is actually so unbelievably rigged. Wall Street's rigged the game so much so, and I didn't, fully understand that during the 2008 housing crisis, even though I had seen like The Big Short and I understood kind of the, it's a rigged game to some degree. Now I'm like, oh, I could vote for Bernie Sanders now. Now whether that's a consequence of thought versus feeling, hard to say. I haven't drawn a direct causal line from that kind of revelation in therapy, but could very well be, if I think about it more. But yeah.
Yeah, I actually think that's something that we'll definitely agree on. I love Bernie. I love everything about him.
Nice.
He is my hero, I
Yes.
guess, of politics, because I wish that the left had gone with him. I understand why they didn't, but like I really like I also think that we could agree. I'm not sure on your take on this, but I hate Biden. But I understand that Biden is better than the alternative.
Yeah, well, sometimes I question that, given how senile he is, and part of me, this is just a very tangential thing, but how like Biden approved like the $40 billion to go to Ukraine. Yeah. I don't think that was appropriate, given how little we've, it's like, well, we have enough money to do that, but we can't, put it, change schools, or we can't, put it into. Like, how about free mental health counseling for people who are in desperate need, or how can maybe refinance student loans, right? Like I'm student loan forgiveness is something I'm skeptical of, because I'm like, I don't think lawyers who are going to make like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year should be getting government assistance. But I get it in some sense, so like we could put that towards refinancing. That's all very kind of surface level political stuff.
Yeah.
And like Trump, he could have the machine is so ingrained in, our politics that I'm sure Trump would have given the money to Ukraine as well, right? So it's like, I don't know. It's a strange series of events. I really, people describe my channel as political, and what I talk about is political, but like I really don't talk about politics like Democrats and Republicans so much. It's important and it's relevant, but like I'm much more interested in like what are the underlying disagreements? What is like the philosophy around like trans issues or abortion, or or even like deeper issues like the purpose of religion, human nature, like how are people set up? Can you change human nature? Stuff like that. That's at the root of a lot of political disagreements, and that's much more interesting to me. Although obviously the politics are relevant. I don't know. That's a huge rant. I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah. No. You're good. You're good. I would just say that, like, for me, right, while you might go like, oh, would there really be a difference? For me, I am seeing the attack on trans rights all around the US right now. And I'm going like, oh my God, I'm so glad that like Biden's in office, because I feel like if we get a Republican president, right, like, I guess my fear is I'm actually scared right now of getting another Republican president, because I think with the current climate, that could like undo a lot of the work that we've done in the trans community to like push for policies. Because like a big thing that you might not even think that is that big a deal, like Florida removed insurance coverage of transgender healthcare, and that doesn't sound that important, but like think about it, like estrogen, when you don't have insurance, for me, for 30 days, when I didn't have insurance, costed me $250. Or in California, when I didn't have insurance. Sorry, 3 months, not 30 days. 3 months was that big. And I mean, I make enough money that I can afford that, right? But I'm going like, it is so easy for that to be too much, right?
Yeah.
Like if I was living alone, for instance, right? I pay $1,000 for rent every month, and I make $4,000 a month. So pretty easy for me. And then I get groceries every week, so that's like $100. But like, let's say I was paying $2,000 for rent, right? And I was living alone, and I had to drive to work, and with the current gas prices,
Yeah.
like it very quickly could add up to
Sure.
like I don't really have the ability to save and do that. And also like you look at stuff like SRS, right, where it's like, just try getting that without insurance, without leaving the country. Good luck.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. Well, like one thing we can go into a whole anywhere, I guess, but like on the issue of like insurance. So like I think the term is transmedicalism people use. I don't have I think that's like some people use it as a slur, like you can only be trans if you have gender dysphoria. Right? Is that
that's really called truscum or transmedicalism.
Yeah, I kind of sympathize with it, or at least for where I'm at now. That makes the most sense to me, the true scum transmedicalist perspective.
I think that we hate on it a lot in the trans community, but I would also say that like I firmly believe that in terms of like advocacy, I do think transmedicalism is a good starting point. I think that a lot of people can go from not accepting trans issues to accepting transmedicalism, and then I'd say that there's another step there. But like,
sure,
I think that the most important thing is it's a lot easier to argue to a transmedicalist why certain things are that in their ideology is like flawed and why it's not necessarily like what the endpoint should be.
Sure.
But I think that like the starting point to even have these discussions requires you to be somewhat okay with trans people. I think transmedicalism is a great way of getting there.
Yeah, and I would call myself a transmedicalist. What that means to different people, whatever. But like my perspective is, I agree with you that there is a creepy backlash against trans people, against gay people, that put people at risk. Like it's like in a lot of in a lot of societies historically, like you would have more freedom and more kind of embracing of different sexualities and different identities and whatnot, and then you would have a backlash, right? And the radical centrist perspective is like, my perspective, I guess, is the reason transmedicalism is, I think, the right maybe starting point, and maybe it requires more conversation or whatnot, but like I am also worried against the backlash against I've got two transsexual, one transsexual friend and another one I've talked to, who don't believe in the excesses, the extremes that I associate with a small minority on the far left, a small minority. Like, for example, the people who are very adamant about like kink being at Pride and how children should be able to have double mastectomies at age 13 or 14. To me, I think that's too much.
I think that's extreme.
Right.
I would agree.
Right. So,
but I would also say that children getting trans healthcare would actually be perfectly fine.
Sure, and depending on how you define it, I think I would agree. But this is why, and it's interesting because I suspect, you and maybe your audience, if you first saw me, and as soon as you mentioned Jordan Peterson, I'm sure all kinds of thoughts came to mind of what this kind of person is. It's like the reason that I call out the extreme stuff. So I saw a Washington Post article that said, I want kink yes, kink should be at Pride, and I want my kids to see it. Right? That was in the Washington Post. Then you have like the double mastectomies at age 13. And then, there's any number of lists that you could kind of cherry pick, it would be cherry picking things that you could share on social media and it would cause a big backlash. Like sexual assault occurring in schools because someone identified the Wee Spa thing, for example. Like there's all these individual instances that I would say are like the people who are that are the result of kind of an extreme position. It's not all people on the far left. It's a small minority of people on the far left who would sort of advocate for that sort of idea, that anyone can do anything, that identity is whatever, and even children can make those kinds of decisions. That is what is causing the backlash on the right to, regular ass trans people. And so my perspective is like, the reason that I am like, I will loudly condemn and say this far left, idea that you yourself said is extreme, right? That, children can get their breasts surgically removed at age 13. When the exact time is, down the line, 18, whatever, it should certainly be covered by insurance because it's a medical condition. But to have it that early, it's like that's extreme, and that's what causes the backlash on the far right. And I'm worried about that backlash, which is why I call out that sort of far left position.
I think that when you're talking about trans issues, you have to be really, really careful.
I agree with that.
I think you'd agree with that. So I think that like a common attack point is trans kids, where kids can't know if they're transgender, and that's like I think that that's actually where a lot of the problems come up. I don't necessarily think that it's like, oh, the mastectomy is at 13. Yeah, that's bad, but I think most people have an understanding of that being like probably bad, right? I think most people would agree.
Well, but the most people, I don't know, because it's the medical, like the Journal of the American Medical Association says that those experiments are valid, even though they're terribly done. So I would say, you say most people think that's bad. It's like maybe most, but not the people who have the capacity for power or whatnot, so I don't know if that's the case. I would agree. I would hope that most people thought it was bad, but
yeah. And for this type of stuff, I like to go a lot by the medical literature because that's like all we have, right? And I think that we could disagree over like the ethics of it, right? Of the experiments or whatever. But I do think that it's important to note that like the second we start abandoning medical literature on this topic, I think that we start losing the ability to discuss it. Really.
Sure, I agree, but my worry is exactly what kind of happened with like cigarette smoking, which is the medical literature was completely wrong, right?
Yeah, and I guess that's a valid fear, but we would expect to see like anything coming out against this, right? And the only study that I can think in recent years that at all went against the trans narrative right now is rapid onset gender dysphoria.
Lisa Littman.
What's up?
Lisa Littman's study, right? Rapid onset gender dysphoria.
I believe so.
Yeah.
It was the concept of kid or adolescents suddenly gaining gender dysphoria and transitioning. But I think that the major flaw in that study that any trans person immediately that's like transitioned at like any age or immediately noticed is the kids were not at all interviewed. It
was parent report, right?
It was only parents. So if I had to tell you, when my mom first saw that I like had any desire to transition, it was probably at age 15 when I asked her, "Hey, can I transition?" And she said no, because she's like, "What the like no?" Yeah. Because obviously there had been no signs, quote unquote. But it's like for me, I had known for 6 years that I wanted to do that, and fully thought of that, and fully considered it, and lived online to test if that's what I wanted to do. Right?
Sure. Yeah. The Lisa Littman study is not comprehensive, but my issue is there is not a single study that exists at all today that is a long-term study on transitioning in children. At least that I'm aware of, but I
might have one. Let me double check. But yes, I might not have that, but I would say that the detransition rate seems to be of children seems to be at the same rate as adults. Well, and it seems like a lot of the transitional care that people in the standards of care, which I'm going to go by the standards of care for this. Mm-hmm. The standards of care seems to advocate for transitional care being mainly puberty blockers, which I don't think is
right. And my understanding is there are no long-term studies on puberty blockers maybe so, because I believe
I believe puberty
blockers. Yeah, and I think there is risk like osteoporosis and whatnot.
Yeah, there's
bone
risk.
It's not 100%, but and honestly, and this again, this goes to it's such a tough. I have such a difficult life being a centrist because I piss off everybody. It's like there are I think it's Ray Blanchard and a couple other transgender medical specialists like who are against the idea of like let's affirm a child at age 13.
Well, Ray Blanchard, I personally wouldn't like to use his work in this case or I wouldn't agree with his conclusion because he doesn't think the transgender experience is real. He thinks that these people are, to a degree, not experiencing what they're describing. And I'm pretty sure he disagrees with neurobiological, the concept that like you could actually feel like a woman. He just says that these people end up with better results if they transition. So it's better to have them transition, even though he's vocally against the concept of transgender.
Interesting.
If that
Okay,
makes sense.
I might not be. Then I might have quoted the wrong
Yeah,
name.
no,
I might
no.
be thinking of someone else.
He is not somebody that is a trans supporter. He's somebody that says that even if you don't support trans people, you should support their medical care because they're at least, even in their insanity, this does seem to help them. That's what he says about it. Yeah. So what he said was that people do it are autogynephilic, or they're just gay people, and that's what he established. Which I disagree with both those takes.
Sure.
Because it seems like at least in the research that autogynephilia in trans women is higher than in cis men, but the issue with taking it as that is that autogynephilia in cis women is higher than in cis men. So like
Sure.
if you look at it that way, it lines better up. It's because why he comes to this conclusion is because he's comparing them with cis men, when if he compared them with cis women,
Sure,
he wouldn't be seen in anomaly.
Sure. I guess the point of me even bringing up Ray Blanchard is that even he prescribes puberty blockers to kids.
Yes.
So like even to your point, if for all of the reasons that you explained, he could be described as anti-trans. Although I don't know, if he's in favor of ensuring that trans people have medical care, it's kind of like. Enemy of my enemy is my friend in some degree.
I'm happy that he comes to that conclusion, obviously. Because that says even someone that I disagree with fundamentally says that this is a valid thing.
Right. So, and that was kind of my point about, like, I am not saying, like, we need to ban, puberty blockers or anything like that. And I think puberty blockers are a little bit more, I do think there is, and I'm not a doctor and not having reviewed the entirety of the medical literature, but my understanding is puberty blockers do carry some risk, but certainly obviously surgeries, you cannot perform a random double-blind trial with surgery, right? And random double-blind trials are sort of like the gold standard. That's how if you're really trying to measure the effectiveness of a treatment or something, you would do a double-blind trial. It's like you can't even do those because obviously you can't have a placebo of having your breast cut off when you're a child, and we don't have any long-term studies on those on that. And I am of the opinion that and I had a debate with Rose Wrist about this a while ago, if you're familiar, and it's just like. Well, are all medical experiments justified if we finally get the data? It's like, if we find out that cutting off the breasts of 13-year-old children doesn't actually do them good over the long run, or most of the time doesn't do them good, because if someone does happen to be transgender, it might work out. It's kind of like that's the kind of stuff that inspires the reaction. It's like you can't just do these experiments, and not expect a giant pushback.
In looking at like the current laws, right? And maybe I'm blind. Again, correct me if I'm just blind, but I haven't seen this at all called upon. I had never heard of that being a thing. What I've heard of a lot of the
You've
times
never heard
is
of what being a thing?
Mastectomies at 13.
Sure.
What I had heard of is these kids are not old enough to decide if they want to go on puberty blockers. That's the argument that I've heard parroted by a lot of right-wing ideologues that are for this.
Yeah,
they don't bring up the mastectomies necessarily; they bring up puberty blockers.
Sure, and I think again, to the point is like, well, if even people like Ray Blanchard are for the puberty blockers, I think you could I think that argument is easier to defeat than the mastectomy, because you agree, right? The mastectomies on like 13-year-old children is not good, right?
Yeah, I would say that generally my stance on surgery is that should be done after 18, and that what we should be looking at is preventing the need for it via puberty blockers, because that's kind of what puberty blockers allow.
So it's funny because like that perspective, like after 18, adults can do whatever they want, and they should have access to whatever medical care they need, gender reassignment surgery or sex reassignment surgery or anything. It's like. I hold that position pretty strongly, and so it's interesting that we have that overlap there. Yeah, I guess it's just like I think it is, it's kind of like, like what's the worst part about Trump? Well, there's many. That's an open-ended question. I'm sure there's a lot of answers to that. I would say,
how much time do you have?
yeah, I would say his inability to call out the far right and sort of the white nationalist part, when he was on the debate stage and he's like, Proud Boys, stand down and stand by, or whatever. He said something to that effect. It was something like to me, if Trump could just like clearly say like, hey, anyone who's a white supremacist and who lives in their mom's basement and hangs out in 4chan, they're losers. They're weak losers, and I want nothing to do with them. The KKK, all of them. If he had said something like that in his own Trumpian little way, like that would be so much better, because he would draw a hard line of saying, look, these extremists on the far right, I want nothing to do with. Now, he didn't do that, and maybe it's because
that's his base.
Maybe, and fair enough. I think you're right to a large degree. I don't think Trump is as racist as he is narcissistic. I think he just wants to win, and so he was willing to appeal to anybody. I don't think he actually wants white supremacy to be a thing, but he knew that if he could just I'll just say these things and they'll vote for me. He'd be the type of person that would do that. But had he distanced himself from the far right more, I think that would he would have actually he'd still have a lot of other flaws, but that's sort of his biggest flaw, arguably. That's what people think he's an existential threat, because he appeals to that far right. And from my perspective, the left, because I honestly identify more on the left, just practically speaking, from a personality standpoint, even. It's our job, so to speak, to call out the people who are actually, the distinction between a child and adult is arbitrary and socially constructed, and therefore we should, if a 13-year-old child wants to be able to have sex with an adult or something, that's appropriate. And it's that is the kind of discourse that is the sort of the postmodernist, sort of the Foucault kind of perspective. That is a perspective that the intellectuals of the extreme far left movement that I'm concerned with had. And so my concern is that's kind of bleeding through into the broader culture, and then you have a reaction on top of that.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess my.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I just haven't seen what you're talking about, and
Sure.
I've seen the right not, and I don't know. Again, I'll just say I've interacted with a good amount of right wingers because by the nature of what I do, I debate my existence all the time. So I've interacted with a lot of right wingers, and I've never heard them quote stuff like this. So I guess what I'm saying is, I would just say I'm not denying that this definitely could happen or that this is the case. I'm just saying I have never seen this. I have not seen this as justification for the newest legislation, and that's why I'm going I don't think that this newest legislation is necessarily because of that.
Fair enough.
I don't think that needs to be invoked for them to want this.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's always going to be a ultra conservative group of people who are against even gay marriage, and it's just that's just the nature of reality. And that there's always going to be a super far left people who are we want to tear down all society and all norms should be eradicated. It's it's how do you integrate those, how do you navigate forward with the silent majority, so to speak, who are just let adults do what they want and have the government provide common sense basic services and whatnot. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah, and I think that we'd agree there. For the most part, I would just say that I think that I would take the lefty approach of I think C16 is a very valid. I think that's a very valid extension of that. Whereas I think you might not think that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, let's get into kind of the pronouns and stuff because.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, maybe I'll ask you directly, sort of the extreme questions. What do you think about xenogender pronouns? It's, Zimzer, all that. How do you feel about that?
I have never met a person that uses them.
Even online?
Oh, I have not interacted with anyone that has used neopronouns.
Okay. So interesting. So I know a teacher I met who I think this is in Chicagoland area. I'm from Chicago, so this is a teacher in sort of the Chicagoland area. I don't know exactly where, but she said out of 12 of her students, or maybe 15, something like 15 of her students, 10 of them use alternate pronouns, like if they're a biological boy, they'll use she, her, or whatever, or they, them. But 2 of them use like it, its, and zimzer, right? And so this is catching on. That's one piece of anecdotal evidence. Obviously, there's I don't think there's a study on pronoun usage, but like, I like that. Well, your response was, I've never met anyone who uses those.
I know about them.
Yeah, I know. I think
I've never met anyone.
You're fair enough. Fair enough. I know of them as well. My question is, do you think that that's valid? Do you think that like someone identifying as an it, its, or a zimzer? Because my perspective is identifying as a different like species or whatever it is, like that delegitimizes and takes away from the actual, like, it's a known, like, gender dysphoria is a real thing. We know it's a real thing. There's a long diagnostic history. Abigail Schreier, who I'm sure many, people, maybe you yourself or other people that, think like you would probably, say that she's a transphobe and, not a good person or whatever. Even she, like, starts her book by acknowledging, like, trans people are real. It's a real thing. And so my perspective is like, okay, let's try and go. If we're starting from there, can we figure out some common ground? I identify as a wolf or a deer or an it or a bug or something like that. It's like that's a mockery of like a legitimate thing that it sounds like you went through. And it's like to say that, you went through surgeries or I don't know exactly what medical procedures you went through, but you went through hormone replacement, right? Yeah. So like that,
I've had SRS.
Okay, yeah. So
I had it when I was 18.
Got it. And that carries risk. So like you took a risk, right? Like all surgery carries risk. And it's like,
in this perspective, I'm not sure I would say that, but sorry.
Well, I just mean like wisdom tooth surgery, like you could there's always a risk in anything. I'm not saying, I don't know how dangerous SRS surgery is compared to other surgeries, at whatever. So I'm just saying like, they're like, you had to go through this whole process, to kind of feel alignment in your body. And then for someone to come along and say, well, just like you, Ashley, you felt that, you were a different gender or different sex. I actually am a deer. It's like, okay, well, now, like, you, like, this is, I don't care how this sounds. It's like you, I can respect and I believe, and it's like, we're from my perspective, we're at least sharing a similar perspective to some degree. But someone who says, well, I'm a deer, and therefore I need to be called its or whatever. It's like, well, that is something else entirely. That is an issue of identity that has nothing to do with gender dysphoria. And what medical procedures resolve being a deer? Do you put antlers on or something like that? It's like to me to put those in the same category of like sexual identity or whatever or gender identity, it's delegitimizing the trans people. That's my.
So I would say that not everyone that uses and again, this is my take on neopronouns.
Yeah.
This is my take.
Neopronouns.
I don't think that everyone that's what they're generally called, or xenogender.
Yeah.
I generally think that with neopronouns, I respect them because it's just like what people want to be called. I don't think that is necessarily the same as what you're talking about, which is like, I forget what it's called, but like being like what you're discussing where it's like, I'm a deer. Like, I don't think that these are necessarily the exact same thing. I think that there is some overlap, but I disagree with like, I would agree with you. I disagree with the animal like spirit thing. Of like, I am this, like, or I am a deer. I would disagree with that, but I would say that like something like neopronouns, right? It just seems like a thing that people like being called, and it's like It's like a name.
It's like a phase. It's like being goth. It's like being a gamer. It's like being an alt-right and not to say that those are like equivalent in their consequence, but it's an identity. You know how like, okay, I'm
and I think that neopronouns are fine. I think that they are So what I would say is this. I think that if they want to like fight for it to be a commonplace or like accept it in broader society, they've got a fucking hard road ahead of them. But I'll at least respect it myself because like
sure. Well, and I would say you're probably just nicer than I am, and I guess I think even though I understand your perspective 100%. Like if someone's just like, look, if you just call me idiot, like it makes me feel better. It doesn't really cause you that much issue. I could see myself in a very specific circumstance addressing someone as some weird pronoun, right? That is out of the norm because I know them and I respect them or whatever.
Yeah.
But my issue is I think that there is actually a cost, and even if it's hard to articulate or hard to identify or hard to prove, there is a cost that comes along with like with the Bill C-16 stuff, and maybe C-16 in particular less so, but maybe just the idea behind it of like, as soon as you make it a law that says you are required to use certain words to address people, and those people get to decide whatever words they are at any given time, it's like, tell me exactly at what point. Like if I say I want to be identified as His Highness or His Majesty, those are my pronouns. Now, and I mean this seriously, you can make the case that someone who has grown up their whole life with very low self-esteem because they were bullied or something like that, a therapist could conceivably say, hey, if you start telling people your pronouns, and this is obviously an extreme example, your pronouns are His Highness or His Majesty, it makes other people kind of address you as like a high person, a person worthy of respect. That can help address some of the lowest self-esteem issues. It's like that's like, just because a therapist can conceptualize that doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean that I'm going to go along with it. And to have it backed by law, I think is a problem. Now, exactly what that problem leads to, and if it's such a small minority of people, is it that big of a problem? It's like, well, these are complicated and things change. So
can we ground this real quick?
What's that?
Can we ground this real quick?
Yeah.
What do you think C-16 does?
My understanding is that it places gender identity under the same protection as like sexual orientation and race, right?
So what does that actually do? Because you're discussing mandating pronouns. Like,
yeah,
I'm more so asking, what do you think that in? What does C-16 specifically entail via that? Because I could tell you, but I want to.
Yeah. So my understanding, and again, I'm willing to hear out from someone who actually has looked into it more. But my understanding is, if someone's gender identity is like let's say I identified as an it's, that's my gender identity. Whatever, deer or dog or bug or whatever.
Gender.
What's that?
So let's run this a bit. That's not gender. Nobody.
Well, I agree. Okay, fair enough. I agree. You're right. But I don't think it's defined well enough where it could, because xenogender is a type of gender if you're using it to describe it. So I don't even know if it's clarified in the law whether or not xenogender is covered under gender identity.
But that wouldn't be a xenogender. That's a completely different thing. What you're discussing is
like bug, like if my
animal kin. Animal kin, like, is a completely different thing.
Yeah, there's other kin, sure.
Other kin, that's what you're discussing.
Sure.
That's
I think the line between other kin and xenogender, I don't think is as clear as you might think it is. But okay, but let's just, for sake of argument, let's say I identify as she, her. My pronouns are she, her. If you do not address me as she, her, if you do not respect my gender identity, then that can be brought forth under like the Human Rights Tribunal in Canada, and you can be charged with a hate crime.
Yeah. So what seems to mainly be talking about or what C-16 seems to mainly talk about is like positions where somebody has a position of power over you. They have to respect your pronouns or like gender identity, right? But what mainly seems to say is that like you can't dead name somebody, right? So like what it seems to be talking about is the idea of like you can't dead name somebody that's like transitioned and has a preferred name or has a different name. Like just use that name. That's what it seems to talk about. It doesn't mention pronouns at all, I don't think. And I think that was something that Jordan Peterson brought up as a possible consequence, but was never in the actual bill. Mm-hmm. It does not bring up pronouns at all.
Sure.
So it's just a bit strange. But I think the biggest thing to take away from it is it seems like wants it so that if you're a tenant, your landlord has to respect your name, and same if like you are working somewhere, your manager has to. And it seems like that's what it's oriented around.
Sure.
I don't think it's that wrong.
Yeah, and so, and again, I'm not, I don't have a strong opinion because I don't, I'd be lying if I said I'm well versed in Canadian law, being an American.
Yeah.
Um, my understanding is, well, like Jordan Peterson's criticism was he's against compelled speech. The idea that, like, as soon as you make a law that says you are required to say certain words, other than like commercial speech and saying like, disclaimer, da da da, this has got this chemicals in it or something like that, then that crosses a line. I think that was his principle. Now, whether that was the right line to kind of stand on, whatever. My understanding was you're familiar with Jessica Yaniv, right?
I am not certain. I might know them. I just might not know that name.
Jessica Yaniv is the person who claimed to be trans and then went to a spa in Canada of a bunch of like immigrant women, and they refused to wax his genitals, and because he still had a penis and everything, and then Jessica Yaniv brought that business, or brought like a lawsuit against them under Bill C-16. Now Jessica Yaniv lost that lawsuit, thankfully, but the idea was that like, that to a lesser degree something like that could happen where it's like, hey, I'm telling you my pronouns are she, her, and I've just decided that you have to do it and you have to call me that. I get why that doesn't seem like a big deal, and it's not in some sense. But I do understand the line that Jordan Peterson was trying to stand on with like, look, I don't care what the reasoning is. You cannot make a law that requires me to use certain words, right? And I get that.
Yeah, I guess what I'd say on that is that isn't that the legal system working there? Like, yeah, it was brought forth and it failed. Isn't that like exactly what we'd want?
Yeah. Well, yeah, yes.
So it seems like at least in this case, it seems like, yes, this was a possibility, but it seems like they did a good job on it. Right?
Sure, right. In that instance, fair enough. And, it kind of has to play out. Now, Canada's doing all kinds of weird stuff, banning handguns and whatnot, even though they don't even have the mass shooting problem. It seems very odd. I know that's completely irrelevant to what we're talking about. I just don't like Justin Trudeau because he's racist and he has blackface. Yeah, and like I said, the C-16 stuff, it's like whether or not Jordan Peterson is right on C-16 is at least is irrelevant from what I value from him, and I would never really make a video going like into here's C-16, or maybe I would eventually or something, but I don't know. It's less, that specifically is less of a concern with the idea more broadly. My issues of like, well, what happens when far right people start being able to say like, hey, literal medical institutions are giving the green light to performing double mastectomies on 13-year-olds. Like, okay, now we get into severe reactionary territory. And that's what I'm like, I hate the far right, and I want them to have the minimal, I don't want them to have any even remotely good points to offer anyone. And the way that you do that is rob them of any reasonable thing they might have to say before they can say it, which is like, hey, and in a very specific sense, you agree, because we both agree that double mastectomies on 13-year-olds should not be allowed. Now, you said you just don't hear that, and fair enough.
I guess my experience is I've literally never heard of that, and my experience is I've talked to these people a lot. Right?
Yeah. Well,
so
maybe you're talking to the dumb ones too, who
Maybe it's possible. It's possible that people are making. But I'd just be curious. Have you seen someone make a point about this?
About double mastectomies?
Yeah.
Sure.
Because I've not seen that in. Have you seen a lawmaker make that point? In the recent laws that have come out.
I don't know.
Or a congressman in the recent claims.
I haven't, but I could very easily see a Lauren Boebert or a Marjorie Taylor Greene, taking just tweeting a screenshot of like a child who just got their breast cut off. I see that a lot on Twitter. I don't have a specific example offhand, but like it'll be a picture of like an under 18-year-old girl usually who had their breasts cut off, and then people will be retweeting it saying like, this is so effed up, blah, 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 or whatever. I see people retweet a lot of detrans subreddit type stuff, which, that's anecdotal and fair enough, but like, there's also...
detransitioners are always going to be loved by the right, and it's an issue of there's not a solution to detransitioners. They're going to exist if you allow transition.
Sure,
right?
And
we're always going to have that like 1%. Now, I'd say that the percentage right now is actually inflated because of the hostile stance that a lot of people have towards trans people, which actually makes them more common. Seems like double.
Yeah, I hear that, and that obviously that could be true, but I also think, like, again, I've read some of the detrans subreddit type things. It's like a lot of people don't realize it was a mistake until many years later. It could be like 4 or 5 years later or something like that. And all of the studies, at least that I've looked at, that have been done on children, like the follow-up period is like 2 years. So they'll perform a surgery or they'll do a hormone replacement and then follow up 2 years later and ask the person, how do you feel? And they say they feel great because, like, depending on what hormones you're taking, they can make you feel really good. But then it's like, oh, it turns out that a lot of these detransitioners didn't realize until 4 or 5 years later or something like that. So my suspicion, and only time will tell, unfortunately, is that over the next 5 to 10 years, like there are going to be there are going to be hard, good studies coming out that show that the detransition rate is much higher than we expected. Because before maybe the last couple of years and before social media, trans people existed for a long time and the rates were consistent, and so the detransition rates were consistent. But I think I think there is a strong, I certainly believe that children can be socially conditioned into believing that they're transgender when they're not actually. Now, I don't know if you disagree with that.
Why do you believe that?
Because I believe that gender is a social construct. So I believe sex is biological and gender is a social construct, right? Gender.
Why is sex not so?
Why is what?
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to understand your definition. So I'm gonna ask the meaning question. Why is sex not a social construct?
Well, I guess it depends on...
Why would you say that gender is but sex is
It depends on how you define social construct, but sex is, male and the fact that men that self-identified, the fact that males on average are taller than females is a biological reality, not a socially constructed reality.
Of course.
Right?
I would agree with you. I'm more so curious that when we get into the really difficult territory of in intersex, how do we start defining male or female?
Well, and this is, and we can get into that, but just to close the loop on what I was saying earlier, the reason I think that children can be conditioned, or can be, and conditioned maybe the right word, or socially conditioned into believing that they are a different gender or different sex, is the same reason that we would say that women having to clean or whatever stereotypes exist about gender roles, those are socially reinforced, right? Through media, through, power structures, through institutions. It's why does that logic not carry through when we're talking about children who, are on TikTok and it's gender isn't real or whatever. You can identify as whatever you want.
At least in the studies that we've done, right? There was that one money study, I forget his name, Dr. Money,
John Money,
yes. John Money. Sorry, have you heard of that one?
No, I've heard of Money's other experiments that didn't go out very well.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that he's an ethical person. I'm not. I actually think that what he did was fucking terrible, right?
And bad research.
But one of the biggest things that he did is there was an intersex kid. I forget their name. Let me get it up. It's
David Rayner?
Yeah, David Reiner.
Yeah, he wasn't intersex. I think something went wrong with the circumcision.
Yes, I thought they were a form of intersex anyway, but no, either way. They were assigned male, either way. So even if I'm getting the deets wrong, they were assigned male, and then something went wrong with the circumcision, and they were reassigned female, and they lived their entire life with gender dysphoria.
Sure.
And
well, it's funny because even that language of assigning and assigning male and whatnot, it's he was born with all of the standard male anatomy, and then he had a bot circumcision, And then
Yeah, and
John
he
Money
was reassigned
suggested,
female.
right, to raise him as a female. And that did
Yeah.
not end up working, and he committed suicide.
Yes, it's horrible. But I think that like we could look at stuff like that, and we could look at the neurobiological factors that lead to trans people being trans, right? That
Right.
seem to, at least.
And and this is why I'm a trans medicalist. Is like, I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Sapolsky. Robert Sapolsky, he's got these he's got a big beard and like a ponytail. He's kind of recognizable.
Yeah. I saw your video where you pulled from a lecture
Yes,
from him.
exactly. Yes, and he talks about you can literally look at the brains of transgender. Now, not all, because what is a transgender person? It's like, well, if I just say I'm transgender, does that make me transgender? It's like, no, I don't think so. I think there's more to it. Like like if you look at the brains of people who've like from their whole life have memories and have said I'm transgender and I feel this way, like parts of their brain are more closely resemble the sex that they say they identify with than the sex that they are, which indicates like this is a real thing. This is obviously a real thing. That's why like transmedicalism, to your point, it's a good starting point. I think it's a good point in general. Is like, okay, that's real. That is different from going back to the rapid onset gender dysphoria ideas. Like it certainly is the case that children, 13-year-olds, whatever, teenagers, 12, 13-year-olds can be conditioned into believing things that aren't true. Like that's self-evident.
I understand what you're saying fundamentally, right? Of like, yeah, this could be. But I would just say that like we could look at another similar thing, right? The rate of homosexuality spiked after gay marriage was legalized, right? So would we
really
say that like I'm pretty sure it did.
I've never heard that. It could be true. My understanding was the rates of homosexuality are actually very consistent in whatever culture you look at, because that's sort of one of the reasons that's one of the pieces of evidence people use to say that it's clearly natural, because the rates are consistent independent of cultural conditioning. Now, people might self-report less because if you're in a country where it's illegal, then there's a risk of self-reporting.
That's what I was meaning. Is that like the reported rates go up after it's legal because like then you could actually be
sure, yeah.
I would say that with trans people, it's really difficult to tell how many there actually are, because if you go country to country, it's slightly different, right? Like you could look at Nordic countries where it seems like female to male and male to female are even 1-to-1, right? Like you look at the Netherlands, it seems to be 1-to-1 there, but in the U.S., it seems that there's way more MTFs than FTMs.
Way more males to females than females to males.
Yes,
I thought it was the opposite. I thought it was more females to males.
That might be the case now, but
okay.
Sorry, a lot of my research I did in 2018, so
sure.
some stuff might be changed.
Yeah.
But it seemed like there was differences in that, and it seems like a lot of this stuff just kind of. It seems like the reporting of trans cases is always going to go up with trans rights being pushed. So I could see a lot more trans kids coming out because, as I understand it in my mind, right? Like once I understood that I was trans, right? That was because I was exposed to the idea that trans people are okay. Or like exist.
Yes.
So I could see a lot of kids being
and I definitely agree that like obviously if you're in a society that condemns being gay, you're gonna have a social pressure to pretend you're not gay or to whatever, to not report it or whatnot. And obviously the same thing is true with being transgender. But at the same time, that could be true, as well as what also could be true is people claiming or people thinking that they're trans when they're not really, and that's not really the source of their discomfort, right? And I've listened to detrans stories and people, a variety of different people, and obviously I don't know anything, and I appreciate these conversations because I'm learning. But like, it seems I've seen like compilations just 10 minutes long of like TikToks of just like someone who is transgender will say, if you think that you're trans, then you probably are. It's like, well, wait a second. No, there's probably a lot more that goes into that.
I think it's deeper than that, but I think that's fundamentally, I think that fundamentally that's not necessarily wrong, where it's like, when you look at like eggs, right? That's what we call them in the trans community. People that like need their egg, quote unquote, cracked in order to see who they really are, right?
Sure.
That's our terminology for it. A lot of the times, like questioning your gender really deeply and like being very between it, or going back and forth with it for years, right? Going like, I might be trans, I might not, right? Like a lot of these people are just trans, and they like are so worried about getting it wrong that they end up not doing it, right? I do think that is fair to say.
Yeah, and maybe. I mean, again, I like the more studies have to be done, unfortunately.
Of course, and I can understand what you're saying as a risk factor, but I guess what I would say on that is that like we can only know with more studies. So I see it as right now all we can do is guess.
Yeah,
and like we could guess back and
but
forth. I guess we can do that.
no,
But then all I'm gonna say is that like I'd agree with you.
I
We
see what you're
probably need
saying.
more studies.
I see what you're
And
saying.
like
Yeah, but my issue is like, and this gets into like a deep like epistemological issue, is like I do not believe that studies are the only ways to make truth claims. I don't need a study that says that the more struggle you go through in life, the wiser you become. Right? Like as you get older and you gain more experiences and you go through more hardship, you generally build character. There's no study that says like people who go through more trauma and go through more difficult things have better character, because you can't measure that. But it's like, to me, that's like the definition of wisdom and maturing and growing older, right? That's like, there's no study that says, one musician is better than another. Like there's all kinds of things that claims that we can make that don't require studies. And to me, like smoking is bad for like giving kids cigarettes. We've never done any long-term studies on giving kids cigarettes early, right? This is an extreme example, but just to highlight the point of like, we don't need a study to prove that. And from my perspective, it's like, just with the nature of like understanding like how children are, like constantly being fed, and it to the point earlier about the algorithm, right? We were talking about it at the very beginning, being like fed things is like, I could easily see a case where someone who's, 12 or 13 and has other issues or something like that is seeing all this stuff about how positively like transitioning affects them, and then they think that's my issue when it's really not. Because I can tell you, like, like projection and thinking that one thing is your issue when it's really something else. It happens all the time, and it's like, certainly that certainly was it for me, where it was like, I thought my issue was, I didn't want to start a YouTube channel because, I didn't feel like I was an adult yet. I've never been in like a successful, functioning, long-term relationship. And, because my parents fought, I thought like, well, that's the threshold I need to cross before I can really be like an adult, right? Like once I've been in a successful, long-term relationship, then I've, kind of surpassed what my parents kind of fucked up on. And then I can go into my life and kind of pursue my, my whatever I meant to pursue. And like, no, that was like a cover for different issues, which is like, I couldn't tell the difference between a thought and a feeling, right? And that's a very personal way of characterizing that. But like, I do think that's true to a large degree.
and just to go through real quick.
Yeah.
That like we don't just give kids hormones, right? They do talk to professionals before they get that. I just want to make sure.
Okay, so here's the thing. I don't know that. I have heard many, and I think it varies state to state.
In order to get anything, you need to talk to a
professional. Right. I hear people are on waiting lists for like years sometimes, right, to get hormones. But I've also heard that with like one visit to Planned Parenthood, people get hormones.
Okay, but
so I don't know
adults.
what to make heads or tails of that. I don't know how that.
You have to be an adult to get from Planned
Parenthood. Maybe. Yeah. I yes, and that's part of the fucking world we live in, where there's so much information and so many different anecdotes that some may not be true and may not be others. My understanding is like with parental consent, kids can get hormones pretty easily depending on the state.
Well, yes.
Whereas the opposite.
So we can go into the idea of, yes, you can illegally do this, right? But like you can illegally give your kids cigarettes.
Illegally. With parental consent, you can get hormones relatively easily, depending on the state. Sometimes you have to be on waiting lists for years. So it's
to get hormones before 18. Yeah, you can do that if you see a licensed medical professional or a licensed psychologist. Yes, you could.
Sure,
but like.
Again,
we're going to like a licensed psychologist.
Yes, I think you are correct, but I've also seen things where like it's like when people get prescribed weed, like to get, it's like you just go in and you say You have back pain?
I have never seen this, so I guess what I'm going to say to you is that, like, this is my understanding of what the medical
Sure.
literature says. This is what the standards of care advocates for. So I'm going to go off of the standards of care because that seems to be what a lot of the doctor
Sure.
or it is the thing that people should be following. So, like, if they don't follow the standards of care, then we could probably even bring up the idea of suing that.
Yeah,
That
and you know,
organization.
and to your point, like maybe it, and this is my point of like maybe if us people on the left were louder about like, hey, people who don't follow the standards of care, like that's screwed up. You know, we need to distance
I don't
ourselves
know
from
of
those
anyone
people.
that doesn't follow the standards
Fair
of care.
enough, fair enough.
That's-
I've seen some. So I literally just, and again, you know, you know, I'd want to cite this directly if I was, you know, having a like a debate or something like that. We're just talking.
Of course. And send it to me later either way, because I would.
Yeah, well, I remember seeing, I don't know if there's a link on Twitter, but it was literally just some therapist's website, and he just said, hey, you can come to me for hormone therapy, and I'm like, I don't know what the word was, like, I'll sign off your hormone stuff or whatever, and it was like, I think it was actually in Abigail Schreier's book. I probably could send it to you, because I could go look at the book again. And it's literally a therapist that says, like, you know, I'm not, I don't believe in gatekeeping hormones from kids or something like that. And so if you come to me, you know, within a session, you can get a prescription or something like that. So
yeah,
it's definitely complicated.
Yeah, but it's just like, yeah, they will have to go through, at least going by the standards of care, which is what most medical professionals and the AP recommends using, to my knowledge. It's that.
Sure.
So
yeah.
that does not advocate for this.
Yeah.
And I would also say that, like, the other thing is, when you're talking about making truth claims, I did want to respond to this.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about making truth claims, right? And like how you don't necessarily need stuff. The only thing that I'd say is this is the primary example of somewhere where, this is, I agree with you on the character thing, right? Like, I actually really agree with you on that. I want to make that clear. I think that that's true. Like, you can't study like what will give you more character.
Right.
So it's like, that is a truth claim that is not makeable with study. But I would also say that here, I think that, like, the idea that trans kids are being on a trend and will detransition, I think can be studied with a long-term study that says, do they detransition?
Sure. Yes, I agree. My worry, I guess, specifically would be that, like, how much of a right-wing reaction is going to come about in the time it takes to get that study? Because, like, they've been saying this whole time, this is effed up and like wrong to like cut off the breasts of 13-year-olds, which I agree with, and it sounds like you agree with. So, like, the idea that, like, well, we can't say that it's wrong to do that until we've had enough long-term studies is like, no, that's the whole issue, is like, we should be able to say, like, this is experimentation that we need to, you know, stop or be very, very cautious with, instead of celebrating on like the front page of like magazine covers. I've literally seen someone with the double mastectomy scars, and I think they were an adult, but it's like, you know,
well, if they're an adult, what's the problem?
Well, the problem is that is not a problem. The problem is the fact that it's happening on kids, so the people on the far right will just associate it all as one thing.
I think that, like, this is okay. It's happening on kids, so the far right will associate all as one thing. I think that, like, we could split this up, right? Like, mastectomies on adults should not be a problem. So I don't see why, like, if the far right cites that, they could cite anything, right? Like, the far right doesn't think puberty blockers are good because of osteoporosis, right? Being a possible risk factor. They think that all of them should just be gone, right? So I don't even think they need to go there if they want to go against it. So it's just like, sure. I think fundamentally, I get what you're saying, but I just don't think that's a reality. I don't see people attacking that. I see people attacking the way lower level concepts, right? And I don't see people attacking that stuff because, like, I don't see that stuff happening. So, like, when politicians are attacking this, they're attacking, like, quote unquote genital surgery on minors, which I have never seen any evidence of ever happening in, like, a way that was not like a doctor that was immediately, like, revoked the medical license. Right?
I can, I know we're coming up kind of on 2 hours here. I could send you the link to I did a video breaking down the study that's in the Journal of the American Medical Association performing double mastectomies on 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-olds.
I'm not even gonna say, like, let's assume that that's real, right? I don't have it in front of me, so I don't.
Sure, and
I would like to look
yes,
but I
would,
will assume that's real for the sake of this argument.
yeah,
So I would say is it doesn't seem like that's what's being talked about. What it seems like is being talked about is
sure, yeah, and I think that just goes back to where we are positioned in the discourse and
maybe
who we follow on Twitter or something like that.
Maybe.
And to your point,
I would say that I'm pretty far left. I mean, like, yeah.
No, I agree,
and
I think you are absolutely right that there are people on the right who will just say ban all of it. I think I saw a tweet from Matt Walsh is like this should be illegal at all ages or something like that. It's like,
yeah,
no, that's not how that should be. But to me, like again, that's a response. That is a overreaction to a legitimate problem. Kind of how not to take this in a completely different direction, and I don't want it, but like Black Lives Matter, and like the riots that occurred and the burning down of stuff and the defund the police stuff, it's like that was an overreaction to a legitimate issue, right? Like there are people who are like, if you kneel during the national anthem, you're being unpatriotic. It's like you don't know the first thing about patriotism if you believe that, and that's just one specific example of like all of the stuff that Black Lives Matter was responding to, but Black Lives Matter still overreacted in a bad way that like screwed over a lot of, black people, in very poor communities and whatnot. And from my perspective, the exact same thing is happening on the right. It's like, ban like all no one should have transgender surgery ever. It's like, that's ridiculous. That's absurd. But I get that that's an overreaction to the idea of like, oh, there are a lot of children who are getting screwed over and a lot of detrans people out there, and I think the numbers are growing.
I feel like you can always find detrans people. I think that the issue is that like detrans people are always going to exist, and like no matter what, they're always going to have a major platform, right? Because the right loves anyone that's going to detransition, right?
Right.
Like being real, and anyone that detransitions is going to get loved by the right wing, and like so. Even if we just talk about from like a psychological standpoint, right? Like they're gonna get a lot of like validation, right, from the right, saying yes, the trans movement of like pushed you into this, right? It was all their fault. So I feel like detransitioners, while we can take what they say and we should acknowledge their existence, right? We all should look at the statistical amounts of them to like look at that rather than just, hey, there's this many on the forums.
Sure.
And we should look at the statistics on like when studies are done, like how many of you regret it because of this, right? I think that we should look at surveys like that because that's really important for understanding like the broader range of detransitioners. Because it seems like half of them, at least, if not more than half, detransition purely because they don't see themselves ever passing.
Sure. And I would agree that my suspicion is that in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see the numbers rise significantly. If what I'm saying is true, which it might not be.
Of course. But if I see that, I will fully say, hey, I was wrong. But I guess what I'm saying is, I see this just being weaponized.
Yeah, and I don't fault that perspective. My worry is that by the time that hypothetically, let's say that I'm right, because I could be wrong, but hypothetically, let's say 5 years from now, it is the case that the detransition rates rise. By the time that you and others come around and say, we were wrong about this, the detransition rate is higher. Again, hypothetically, by the time that comes around, it might be too late because it's like, everyone to the right of you would have been like, we already knew this was the case, and now you've experimented on all these kids, so now we're just never going to trust anything that anyone on the left ever says, and like. That's an extreme kind of position or extreme kind of scenario, but like that with the way that the society is polarizing, like that's kind of where I see it going. But
I think that's already that. Like I think that you're looking at it as though like the right has any faith in transgender care right now, which they don't. Like
any faith in
what?
I
feel like what you're saying is like, oh, what if they lose faith in that, like, leftist science around, or quote-unquote leftist science around, like, transgender people, right? Like, you're talking about them losing faith, am I right in that? Yeah. So what I'm saying is, I think that while I understand where you're coming from with that, the issue is they've never had any faith.
Well, I don't know about, and maybe I'm not articulating myself as well as I could. I'm worried about the people in the middle who would convert to the far right. People in the middle who would normally be like, yeah, I don't mind like transgender issues, who then see like, oh, wait a second, like I thought like cutting off the breasts of 13-year-olds was a made up talking point by the far right. Turns out they were correct. Well, now I'm going to join the far right. You know, they wouldn't say this explicitly, but like I'll vote for whoever is the most against cutting off the breasts of 13-year-old children. Right? Like that's people don't vote based on policy and stuff. They both vote based on that feeling. And you know, I've got like cousins and shit and people who are very apolitical who wouldn't even know who Karl Marx was, like couldn't even name, are completely removed from politics, right? Who they'll like, I'll hear from them like, you know, they like, I saw this like drag queen story hour or whatever, or I saw, you know, someone talked about kink at Pride or something like that, and now I'm like, fuck that. I'm for whoever is against that. It's like, that's how you create far right, you know, fascists.
Yeah, I guess what I look at is I look at like generally like policies, right? Like what are policymakers looking at when they make their policies? And it doesn't, I could agree with you. Yeah, that's a problem. We should call that out. But we should also look at the fact that like the policymakers, right? Like people that, for instance, did the laws in Idaho, people that did the law or trying to push the laws in Texas, people that are trying to push the laws in Florida. None of them cite that. And I think that it's notable that none of them are citing that. And I think that like we can acknowledge that, yes, that like if that what you're discussing like with the mastectomies, that's bad. But we should also acknowledge that that's not why people are against this. People aren't acknowledging this when they're being against this.
Sure. Yeah. And
at least politicians. So I think that like we can acknowledge that. And I agree with you. We should acknowledge that because it's probably good. And I acknowledge that as well. Like, hey, let's not do that. But I also think that like what you're saying kind of, I don't want to say it's fear mongering because I don't think that's like the goal, but I think it might come across like that because realistically, it's just trans kids in general. We don't need to go there for the right to disagree with it, right? The right disagree. When you start talking about trans kids, you say hormone blockers and the right goes, whoa, can they make this decision? And I feel like that's what we need to focus on. They're not even cool with the hormone blockers.
Sure.
So I feel like this, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and just to be perfectly honest, you know, like I said, like we talked about even Ray Blanchard agrees with occasionally being able to prescribe puberty blockers, but like, you know, again, like I think that, for example, Adderall is overprescribed. Now, I don't have any strong medical empirical research to say that. It's just my sense of things. I would probably say the same things about hormone blockers. So I can understand that, like, I understand the idea that people are against overprescribing any drug. Right now, can I list you the studies or the hard evidence for me to explain that? No, it goes back to the idea that, like, I just generally think there's an upward trend of people thinking that they're transgender when they're not because of things like, you know, TikTok or whatever. And like, I get that sounds like because backwards people say that, like, oh, well, these kids are on TikTok, so then they turn trans. It's like they're very silly people saying that who have no understanding of things. But then it's my mind changed when I saw like a 10-minute compilation of just, you can be trans, you can be trans, you can be trans, you can be trans. In the same way that my mind changed, like the whole like transgender people in bathrooms, right? That was like a whole like fear mongering on the right. And then I saw the Wii Spa video and I was like, Jesus Christ, like this is actually a legitimate, you know, problem that has to be ironed out more and we can't just dismiss it, right? And it like, and you know, I'm in favor of someone like you being able to use whatever bathroom. You know, we talked about this on the panel we were on. It's like, you know, if you committed a crime, like you should be in the prison that, you know, the prison that is more aligned to the sex that you are, and based on the fact that you've had SRS, it's like you're more of a woman than, you know, men in a lot of ways. So like, you know, be in the women's prison and whatnot. So
yeah, and I mean, why we're talking right now is because of that, and why we're having a conversation. I'm not like jumping at you is because of that, right? Because I understand that like there's more nuance to it. Because as I said, the average people I have on here are just people that are just so against trans people that they like you need to jump on them because they're just gonna keep going about like anti-trans stuff. Whereas I don't know. You've been generally good about that, so I do appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, and I know we're coming up on I think 2 hours or so, but
of course.
Was there anything you wanted to cover or questions or anything before?
I guess what I would say is I think it's really important when we're discussing these issues to acknowledge, if we're going to acknowledge the fear of the right snapping back, we should always be acknowledging the fact that they aren't even reading this data most of the time when they're making their decisions, at least with trans issues.
Yes, yes, and again, I think I need to do a better job at explaining my concern of like there's there's the 5% on the far right and the 5% on the far left, right? But like when societies fall apart, like what happened in Nazi Germany or what happened in communist Russia, like that 5% ended up capturing the middle, right? So my issue is what kinds of things would allow the middle to be captured by the far right? The middle who in all other circumstances would just be like, yeah, let people live and let live, I don't care. But as soon as they see a picture of or an article about, you know, kids getting their breasts cut off, now they're suddenly way more sympathetic to the far right. Right? And to your point, like, well, the far right, they never cared to begin with. Their goal was getting rid of trans people no matter what, which I agree. That's why that's why I would characterize them as far right and therefore out of the fucking question, right? But the people, like, there are ways that people in the middle can, you know, get sucked into the far right or or far left. It's like, hey, you know, like the abortion stuff, right? It's like most people are like, you know, like I think if it's 8 months in, yeah, you probably shouldn't be able to get an abortion, but like the moment that life begins at conception, that's obviously absurd. But oh shit, there are Republicans trying to make it illegal so that if you take a Plan B pill, you've committed homicide. Oh shit, I'm for whoever's against that, right? It's like that's how a lot of people make their decisions. And what I'm worried about is people getting sucked to the right or left. But I agree with you.
I think they already are kind of being sucked that way. Like, I don't know. Maybe this is just me. Sure. I already worry that trans kids as a concept is kind of doing that. And that what we need to do is like work with it to be like, no, like puberty blockers are a pretty reasonable take, right? Now we can disagree about hormones, about mastectomies, but like puberty blockers are pretty reasonable. I'm not even sure the center agrees with that. Because I see the center as saying no, puberty blocker is bad. So like what I see
and like I said, admittedly, I need to do more research. I don't know what the rates of osteoporosis are and all that stuff. My understanding was it's higher than it was led to believe by. Like some people say that hormone blockers are completely reversible with no effect, or with very rare side effects. And it's like they might be reversible some of the time or even most of the time, but a lot of the time they're not. And that dishonesty around it, I think, is difficult.
So I can explain it. So what it is your bone mineral density, and this is my understanding of it, so I could be wrong. But my understanding of it is your bone mineral density while you're on them goes down, and sometimes that can cause osteoporosis, right? It's that concept of your bone mineral density going down. But what seems like is after, and I agree, it's a long time, but like after 10 years of being off them, it seems like even if your bone mineral density went really low, it will go back up to normal rates in 10 years. And yeah, that's a long time, but like that's like the maximum.
Sure. Yeah. And,
so
and
it seems like seems like they are fully reversible. It's just the timeline and how long it takes them to be reversible is the question that shifts person to person.
Sure. I'd have to look into it more myself.
Do research.
But to your point, it's like if Ray Blanchard agrees with using puberty blockers sometimes, then there must be some validity into it, right? You know, for
of course.
So that's kind of where I land on it, but
yeah. And I mean, either way, thank you for chatting with me. I'm sorry if I'm annoying to chat with. I know that I snap a lot.
No, this is fun. I appreciate it. Yeah, well, maybe we can talk again sometime in the future or something. But yeah.
Yeah.
So good to talk to you again.
Would you like to shout yourself out and give yourself like?
Yes. Well, if I don't know your audience very well at all, but if I haven't completely turned them off with my Jordan Peterson fandom, you know, I PF Jung is my YouTube channel. I think it's in the description of the Twitch stream. And yeah, I mean, I like I said, as a centrist, I'm hated by everyone, so I kind of get used to it to some degree. But like, you know, my heart's in the right place. I think I'm trying to draw that middle ground. You know,
your heart is in the right place,
right? And you know, I think you and your audience would believe that, and I, you know, rightfully so. Obviously from my perspective, but like, there's always gonna be some number of people on the far left or the far right who are like, nah, this guy's even having a conversation with you, the far right will say, you're legitimizing, insanity or whatever. It's like, okay, you guys are, need to go see a therapist and stop repressing yourself. And the far left would say like, oh, well, hold on, you're against neo-pronouns. You're as bad as anyone else, right? So it's like, there's always going to be some number of people on the extremes on both sides who are upset with me. So I enjoy finding people who, I'm a Jordan Peterson fan, and you're a trans person. It's like, in the very stereotypical one-dimensional view, you'd think we were on opposites, but like, there's enough.
No, I think we agree on a lot.
Yeah, there's enough common ground. We still have our differences, but there's enough common ground that, it could be like, okay, well, if we were going to vote on a specific policy, could we agree on something? Trans issues aside, like anything, right? We could, have some good faith to say like we can move forward, right? And that's kind of what I'm trying to go for.
Well, yeah, and I would just say to my audience, like, I mean, there's a reason that I would have a conversation with you, right?
Right.
And not a debate,
yes,
right? Why I would center it as a conversation, not be like citing exact sources and reading through them on stream. Like, there's a reason that I would do that with you and not someone else.
Right, exactly.